Hello, we're the West Ladies. Welcome to Homestead Blessings.
Today we're excited about sharing with you the simple and beautiful art of making a quilt.
There's a rich heritage in quilting that has been kept alive and passed down through many generations. It's challenging and it's fun.
And it's very rewarding.
And we'd like to encourage you to keep it going. So come on and join us in the art of quilting. One of the first things that we like to do whenever we get into a big project like quilting is to do a lot of research on it. Kind of gets you in the mood and you learn the history, and it can be really rich and fun. And so I think Mom is going to show us some history and interesting facts that we've collected about quilting.
Well, quilting is amazing. The history of quilting is fantastic, and you can go to the library and check out some wonderful books. And one thing I'd want you to do on your quilting adventure is you might want to start a journal, and you'll be so happy you did. And it's very educational. You can start your journal with little tidbits of history that you've learned. Years and years ago, they stuffed quilts with corn husks and cotton and wool and bark even. I'd heard about now how they did. I don't know, but I've read it several times, but it's a great study. So in your journal, you can put little scraps of fabric. You can put the date that you made your quilt.
And a little bit about why you made it.
Yeah, and it's really nice.
That is neat.
Yeah,
Good
very
way to remember.
Personal. So we started our quilt on our quilt adventure. We started thinking about our colors, and usually that's...
Exactly. And now we'd like to show you what we're going to make today. This is just a simple 4-patch. We have 4-patch and then do you call it a 1-patch?
One patch, easy.
And so that's what we're working with today. And the first thing you need to do is pick out your colors that you want to make your quilt.
Another nice thing to do is get you a nice piece of flannel, put it on the wall, and then cut out your squares, and you can just set your squares, your colors on that flannel.
Wow, it just sticks.
It just
you don't even
sticks
have to
wonderfully.
That is so cool.
And then you can kind of look, and we decided we wanted to do tan, red, and blue. We wanted a real country look. And I had a lot of blue and tan and check. I had all this upstairs in my scrap room, in my sewing room, right?
Yes.
So we're going to show you how we made this quilt, and we're going to show you how to cut some patches out. Yeah, I'm going to fold this quilt.
Okay. So now we're at our little cutting table here. The first thing you want to do is pick out a color scheme and, of course, your design of your quilt. And what you can do is get some graph paper or just some plain paper, and we just kind of started sketching an idea of what we wanted, like how we were going to do 4-patch, then 1-patch, then 4-patch, or you can, there's all kinds of ways and geometric designs that you can do, but it just gives you an idea and something to refer to, you know, write it down, get some colored pencils and kind of sketch it out. And you can see, I think, Mom, you started this and you just were so eager you wanted to get right to the quilt, so she kind of just stopped. You don't have to do the whole thing, but it helps give you something to refer to. So
and you can be very intricate, or you can be real simple. I decided to make one square throughout my quilt, and then what we call a 4-patch, which is really 4 squares in this large square.
Okay, for our pattern, for our blocks, we use what you call a template. This is what you're going to use to trace or to actually cut around to cut your fabric. This right here is, Mom just went to the hardware store. She used plexiglass. For the quilt that we're making today, it's 4.5 by 4.5. It's a square. And then this one is 8.5 by 8.5. And remember that in quilting, you take a 1/4 seam allowance on all sides. So it's going to be 1 inch smaller.
Yeah, we actually went to our bed and measured the bed, right?
That's a great way.
That's how we started. Yeah. And then we decided how much, and that's what you can do. You can measure your bed and figure from there how large you want your blocks.
And the bigger the block, the less piecing and sewing you're going to have to do. The smaller, the more intricate and more sewing. But, you know, quilting is just a really fun thing. You don't have to be intimidated by it. And we would like to encourage you to start with bigger pieces because they're easier to work with. It's just fun when you see your quilt coming together.
What we'll be doing now is putting our 4 patches together, right?
Right, and I
so
guess
we
we
have
need
to
to-
cut them first,
We
right?
do.
I want to share with you a nice, wonderful way to trace your fabric. On the darker fabric, like the dark blue or black or whatever your darker color is, you can use a white color pencil, or you can use this nice sewing chalk, quilter's
That's a
chalk.
good idea.
I had the colored pencil on hand, so I used that.
That's nice.
And I found out that of course I had it on hand anyway, just my number 2 lead pencil works on the lighter colors, and because it's not going to show up on the back of the
And
quilt.
you want your pencil pretty sharp, so have a pencil sharpener. Sometimes it's easier to see your mark on the wrong side of the fabric. So today we're drawing our line, just tracing around the template on the wrong side of the fabric.
Also, tracing, cutting, marking the best you can, the most accurate you can,
Right.
makes a difference in your quilting.
It does. And if you have a salvaged edge on your fabric, you always want to not use that because it'll bunch up. So always go in from the salvaged edge. A lot of times you can just cut that right off so that you're never tempted to use that fabric. So that's why we went in a little bit. Okay, and today we're using shears
Very carefully, cut right on the line.
right
here.
on the line, yeah.
Actually, when I had a lot of my patches drawn out, it was very relaxing to me just to cut, and then I'd have a square. And I know a lot of people say the actual quilting is relaxing. To me, cutting was relaxing,
Really?
which is odd, isn't
Uh-huh.
it? Yeah.
And right now we're just cutting, as you can see, one piece of fabric at a time.
During the Crusades, people had to have quilted material, and they had it underneath their armor. I thought that was pretty neat. Oh, the history of quilting is incredible. Now, so when we cut our squares out, what I like to do, I had a certain amount of squares. I
Right.
figured out how many reds, how many tans, how many blues. For this one little quilt
We
here.
did like 14 tans, 29 blues, and 28 reds, and we had one neutral for a total of 72 small blocks. And we had 17 large blocks, the 8.5 by 8.5. And so we just kind of divided it up into reds, tans, and blues.
And we alternated. That's what we were thinking. Oh, gee, how can we make this very simple without, you can do some beautiful geometric designs in quilting. Of course, y'all probably know all that. But we
Yes.
decided to do an old country quilt, and we decided to just simply alternate when we
Would use certain colors and all that. This is the laying out and designing kind of the second time around after you've sketched it on paper.
You've got
After
all
you
your
get your blocks
squares.
cut, you might change a little bit. Maybe you decide you want something else. So this is a great time to go back to your flannel board, or even if you have a bed or a table, or just get right down on the floor and just lay your cut pieces out and, just kind of plan how you would like the design to go. And see, there's all kinds of things you could do. You could keep going up with these prints, and this is the time where you can really have fun.
But what's so wonderful about this little quilt today that we're making is I picked out tans, reds, and blues, and Jasmine picked out pinks, greens, and yellows. Her quilt's going to look totally different. It's going to be nice for a little girl's bed or a lady's bed.
Right.
And mine is more country. It would look good on a little boy's bed, a
would.
twin bed. Or a baby, actually it's the size of a baby crib also, but if you
Right.
kept making it, if you kept making your rows and your squares,
You could have
a twin
whatever,
bed,
twin,
yeah.
whatever size, just keep cutting your
Really
blocks.
fun.
Okay, so that's kind of your layout. This is the first step in quilting, and then I think we're ready to piece. Now we're ready to start putting our pieces together. We have a couple of blocks laid out here, and I'm going to share with you a handy tip so that you keep everything in order and it's not all mixed up. If you have a piece of chalk, you can mark your 4 patches starting at the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that way you'll know that this is how you want to sew it. You can also pin it, and also when you have all your rows marked out, we just like to leave them laying on the floor or the bed, and you can number your rows. Just take a little piece of paper and write row 1, row 2, row 6, or whatever, and then you just pin it right on your fabric like so. That's the wonderful thing about paper and straight pins, they pin right through. That way you can keep up with your rows. You like to just sew, and then once Mom gets a row done, she'll put it right back on the bed, right, Mom?
Right.
Yeah.
And I like to take my patches and I like to mix them all up and see what looks nice and things like that. So we basically decided we want to alternate our colors. So here's red, blue, and I have another blue and a tan. And since this has a little different print, we thought that looked okay. So we want to,
So
you like
can
to
I-
pin them, right?
Yeah. You
Right
can
sides
also-
together, right?
Right sides together, and
Going to attach the two first, right?
exactly. Pin it, and then we'll go over to the machine and sew it.
Okay.
And pin it just like you would have it ready to go and sew, and that way you know how it's gonna lay back down on your quilt.
Yeah, that makes sense. This pin is where I'm going to sew right in there. So I'm going to
Exactly.
take this right over to my sewing machine.
Right, and we have our treadle
Good
machine
old
here
treadle
today.
sewing machine. They just don't seem to have as many problems, and they sew through nice thick bits of fabric. I'd like to give you another tip. On quilting, since 1/4 inch is our seam allowance. Yes, thank you, Jazz. My presser foot gives me 1/4 inch. So
there.
some folks might not have that. So what you can do is from your needle to 1/4 inch, you can measure that real nicely, and you can use a piece of masking tape. We're gonna give this a nice 1/4 inch seam and attach our very first part of the patch, which is my two top little patches, which will end up making a block, right? Oh boy, we just had our machine oiled. This is a blessing. Use a treadle machine very often. You want to oil it often. There we go. I'm just going to go nice and slow right now. I'm not worrying about doing, well, I don't have backstitch on my treadle. We just turn it around. But a lot of people will knot when they're making quilts. They will knot their
The ends of the thread so that it
Just
stays together.
that it will pass down through generations and stay
Although
together.
you don't have to, because you are gonna cross this with another seam. So many folks don't backstitch or tie their knots, they just leave them, but I think it's a good assurance to do that.
Now, we open up our blocks.
Right.
And of course, this chalk is nice because it'll just rub off real nice.
Exactly.
And the very next thing we'd like to do is iron our seam down.
Okay, I'll iron this and then you can
Thanks.
sew the other
Okay,
block.
great.
Okay, in quilting, especially when you have coordinating fabrics, a light and a dark, you want to iron your seam allowance to the dark side. So a great handy thing to do is to lay this dark side up, and then you open it up, and that way your seam is already going facing toward the dark fabric. And also when you're quilting, you press and you lift your iron and press and lift your iron instead of sliding like when you're ironing clothes or even in sewing. So, and that gives it a nice crisp finish there. And you just press it on the top, and then you can flip it over. Whoops, we didn't catch that one. And then press it on the wrong side. And again, we're lifting the iron, and pressing.
What I'm going to do now, I'm going to, once again, to make this is going to be my block. These are 4 patches, making my block, and I've got 1 and 2 connected, 3 and 4 connected. Now I'm just going to lay 1 and 2 right over to put right sides together. I'm going to line it up, and what I've learned is it's real nice to line these seam lines together.
As perfect as you can, because
Yes.
the middle is what's going to show.
Kind of important, you're right. So I'm going to slide. Sometimes it doesn't want to slide. You have to kind of slide it and eye it and look at it and all that. And I've got my seams pressed down nice. So I'm going to be able to sew that
Right.
really nice. I'm
And
gonna
usually,
start.
when you coordinate, your seams will be laying opposite ways. That way you won't have that bulk. If they were all folded the same way, it would be kind of
right.
bulky there. So when you coordinate your colors like that and iron your seams, they're perfect.
Wonderful. And this is a wonderful. We're probably going to go back to the iron, right?
Yep, it's ready.
And this is what I love to do. I like to open it up. Then I have a Ta-da! Have my
Oh,
block.
that looks nice.
Isn't that nice? Even as simple as a 4-patch. There's a lot you can do with the 4-patch.
There
huh?
is, there
okay,
is.
there you go. Very
Okay.
simple.
So, and I think that we're going to put the darkest side up and just open it up like before and press.
Press. It's always nice to have your iron close to your sewing machine.
Yes, that does help a lot. Okay,
Oh,
it's ready to.
beautiful. And now we have a 4-patch here, and I'd like to make my row for my quilt. I'd like to put my 4-patch
your
together on
solid
my
block.
solid block. And so once again, I'm going to put right sides together, fold this over, and match it up as the best I can. And I like to kind of hold it up, and sometimes you have to turn it around and make it look really nice. Of course, you always remember you do have that 1/4 inch that gives you a little mercy when something's maybe a tad out of line. That's why cutting is so important. You want to cut as careful as you can. What do you think, Jasmine? We can go with that.
That looks pretty good.
Okay.
You can hold it.
Trim it.
Mom's pretty confident she's just going to hold it.
Well, I like to do that. You could pin it, of course.
When you're first starting out, you might
Yeah.
want to pin it until you get comfortable and know it's going to stay.
Once again, there's my
Where you
masking
want
tape, and my presser foot is my, and I just put this down here, and then I'm going to go. My presser foot's sort of my guide there, and I have a little.
Yeah, that little extra, she's just going to ignore it.
This is a country quilt, so that's a blessing. I like to look at the old quilts. If y'all have time and you can go somewhere and find some old quilts and look at the stitching, and a lot of the old quilts were stuffed with cotton. That's pretty neat.
That's nice.
Yeah. Okay, now we've got a 4-patch and a 1 block. We have 2 blocks joined together. So this is the start of a row now.
It keeps growing. You build on it.
We've added these blocks together already. And we're going to add these together.
So we're going to put right sides together.
This will finish out a nice row because we went 7 across and
Right. I think we did 5 down. And like we said earlier, you can just keep adding to this. You know, keep adding rows, add 1 more block if you want it a little bit wider, and keep adding rows if you want it longer. You usually start at your top row and you join block to block. And once you have all your rows, then you'll start joining row to row, and you'll have a quilt pretty soon. A lot of people still hand piece today, even with the wonderful sewing machines we have. But the nice thing about hand piecing is you can take your quilt along with you wherever you go. People do this and while they're waiting on something or traveling, it's great. It's just, in and out is the basic hand piecing. But
wow.
all right.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4 is there.
Yep.
So
And
you're
so-
going to press that a little bit?
Yeah,
That's a
just a little
nice
bit.
row.
And it is. It's nice. And then we could get out. Guess
So
it's
in our
time to-
quilting, we're making our piece top here, and we're going to have our batting and our backing, and so those 3 pieces quilted together will make a nice, but our top is the first thing we start with, isn't it?
Exactly. And so you make your rows, and then once you start making all your rows, you start joining them together. And we have one.
We're going to join together right now.
Exactly. We have we've joined all these rows together, and so now it's time to add the last row. Wow.
Wow. So we're going to start down here because we've got a 4-patch here. We want our solid here, and then our 4-patch and a solid. So we're alternating colors. Would be nice to start
do you
laying
do
it right
this?
here. Let's just put it like this, right here.
This is a good thing
Yeah.
to do on your
Table or on your bed. And I am going to pin it. I do like to use the pins on this, and what I do like to use is I line up the seams the best I can. I usually line the seams up. A lot of times it's not going to be totally perfect, but if you cut careful as you can and line up the seams, it will turn out. I do a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but
for joining your
many
rows.
people use, for joining, many people go ahead and use the 1/4 seam allowance. I just do a little tad bigger because I want it to hold good, but that's me. But that's what's so nice about making a quilt.
I know,
it's
you
your-
can just, it's yours.
It's
So you
yours.
can, get creative and do what you like, or whoever you're making it for. You
Oh, and it's a wonderful gift to give.
Oh, they are.
Oh,
I mean, a
boy.
lot of time and love has gone into this, so
Right.
it does make a wonderful
And a lot
gift.
of times, a lot of dresses that somebody wore, right?
Exactly. We don't
Oh,
always go out and
shirts
buy
and-
new
no,
fabric. We
no.
love to use used fabric, and at first I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of weird. Mixing. We do use some new fabric and then mixing an old fabric, like a old dress or something. And then I started thinking, usually, we like to wash our fabric anyway. And if you want a new fabric to wear maybe and to match your older fabric, you can just wash it a couple of times. Sometimes you can even add a little bit of bleach, and that'll kind of fade the colors a little bit of your newer fabric so it matches more with your older fabric.
We have a friend, next door neighbor, they have 9 daughters. And
Yes.
the little girl made a quilt, and she said, "This is from my sister,
Oh,
and
I
this
know.
one's
It's-
from my other sister."
It's almost like a memory quilt when
memory
you use things that have been, worn before, like dresses or whatever.
When we get this row on, we'll have a quilt top. That will be exciting.
That is.
Yeah. And this is what I like about, you can cut your pieces on one day.
Exactly. You don't have to. I mean, this is a several-day project. An art treadle machine is a little different. You turn the wheel away from you. Most sewing machines, you turn it towards you, but this one kind of has a mind of its own.
I am using my 1/4 of an inch. I'm just going to stop just for one moment and make sure
Everything's lined up.
uh-huh,
That's a good
that I don't
idea.
have anything underneath here.
Right. Helps
Okay.
to keep this spread
Thank
out
you.
over here
That helps.
so it doesn't bunch up under the needle. And treadle machines, it just takes a little bit of coordination while you're sewing, and a lot of times you can get a good foot workout or
Oh, yeah, it builds
Yeah.
up the calves, I
yes,
think.
it does. And then, so you can exercise and sew and make a quilt at the same time. I love that.
Well, I like it if there's a storm and winter, and it's nice to sew.
Oh, it is.
Oh, and the noise. I like the noise.
You like that little ticking, yeah. Years ago, when that's all they had was treadle machines and no electricity, women would move their sewing machines out onto the porch.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
And they would
You can
sew on the porch and use the
outside.
natural light.
Actually, there's a few still in our community.
Well, we
sew
do
out-
it too. We
Yeah.
love it. Usually
out on the
always have it by a window for good natural lighting. And then that's nice too, especially if you're gonna be doing this in the spring. Staying up in the house when spring's going on is kind of hard, so just move it on outside. You could probably even do that with the electric machine. Those are pretty portable.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like it's gonna come out pretty much. And what's nice, even if the end is a little different, we're
Right.
not gonna worry too much
No.
about that.
You trim that.
It looks like it's coming out pretty nice. Almost there. All right. And let that up just a little bit. Okay. And I don't have to worry
Wow.
about leaving too much. Okay, this is it. We're gonna open this up, and we have our pins in
Oh
here.
yes, take out our pin.
Take out the pins. This is
that
great.
all?
Now we should have a quilt top,
We do.
and that is one of our layers, which is very important, of course, because it has our pattern and our design.
Is there another pin?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I've heard stories of pins that stayed in there even after the quilting was done. People would
Oh, dear.
find pins when it was on
Make
their
sure.
bed. That's not too comfy. So make sure you get all your pins
That
out.
one. Okay.
Oh, look at that.
Oh.
We should probably iron it, but
Oh,
that
here's
looks
one more
pretty-
pin. I
One
know.
more pin.
You should press it.
Yes.
Yes. Because we're going to sandwich this together and actually do the quilting
Right,
part.
so we'll iron this and then we're ready to sandwich our
Yes,
quilt
it's a
layers
top.
together.
Now that we've got our quilt top made, it's time to sandwich our quilt together.
Actually, that's what a quilt is. It's a sandwich of fabric, one on top, one on the bottom, and some type of filler. Years ago, they used to use cotton or wool or even corn husk, but we're going to use a nice material that you can get at most fabric stores and some other department stores sometimes. And it's like more of a synthetic material.
Yeah.
It makes it nice and fluffy, and it washes well and sews
Isn't it,
well.
you would call this your batting?
Batting, yes, we call this batting. So what we want to do is sandwich a bottom, and a lot of times we use a sheet. Some people like to use another kind of fabric of cotton, and it's usually solid, like this is. Then we want to use our batting, and then we want to use our quilt top, and that is actually what a quilt is. It's those
3 layers.
3 layers sandwiched together and then sewn. So right now we're going to sandwich, and before we sew, we're going to baste.
Mom, would you like to tell us about this piece of material here? This is the underneath, the bottom?
The backing.
The backing?
This is
Okay.
called the backing, and actually we just measured a little larger than our
Finished quilt top.
So we put the sheet down. You can use a floor. We use these nice tables here, and to hold the sheet together.
Hold it down to the
Well,
table.
yeah, hold it down to the table. We use masking tape.
Right, yeah, that looks like it works really well.
Holds it down
Right.
nice. So then our
Okay.
next thing we're going to put down.
Is the
Anna?
batting.
And this, you want to cut a little bit smaller than your backing, but at least an inch bigger than your quilt.
So it's gonna fit like inside the border.
Right. For now, you want it a tad bigger, at least an inch bigger all the way around than your quilt top.
Yes, and I'd like to say you might want to use, depending on what kind of quilting you want,
Right.
you may want to use a thin batting to start with.
The thinner the batting, the easier the quilting.
Okay.
And I think our quilt top is roughly 46 inches by 56 inches. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you're going to need for your backing and your batting. So we're just kind of centering it. So take your hand from the middle and just smooth it. Mom, why don't you grab that quilt over there? We'll show you a quilt that's been basted with needle and thread, but today, and this is a handy tip, we're going to use safety pins. And they actually make a quilter safety pin now to baste with. I guess it's just got a little curve right in here,
Yeah,
and it
in
makes
the
it a little
needle
bit, in the needle part, it makes it a little bit easier to get through all 3 layers. But
You can use regular.
we use
Safety
regular
pins.
safety pins, right?
This quilt is basted with threads. You're not actually quilting it, you're just basting your sandwich together.
If you use contrasting thread when you're basting, then it's really easy to go back and take it out because that's what you're gonna wanna do.
So the idea here is just you're temporarily holding your quilt together until you do that fine country stitching. So we're just going to take the safety pins
Okay.
here and we
Right.
start in the middle.
This is nice about having 2 or 3 folks together at one time.
To do this about every 3 or 4 inches. The more pins and the more stitches, if you're going to stitch, the nicer and flatter it will be. And when you go to quilt, that'll really help out. You want to go through all 3 layers.
And just work your way from the middle. And the whole time, just smoothing it over with your hands and kind of keeping it nice where there's no wrinkles. You don't want puckers or wrinkles in your quilt.
When you've done your first quilt and you see some puckers and wrinkles, you just smile and no, you get
character.
better as you go on. And
Yeah, you wanna be careful with the safety pins that you don't stick one in your finger. Like I just almost did.
oh, did you? This is pretty much basic principle of basting with pins, and like we said, you can use needles and thread.
After you get it all pinned or basted, it's ready to quilt.
We have put together our quilt. We've done the layering. We have our quilt top and our batting and our backing all together now. We've got it all pinned down and we're ready to stitch it together, which is the quilting part.
What we like to do is, of course, have our needles and our thread together.